This is a key to the worksheet on section 2.7, part 1, and that's the one dealing with inverse functions. And so in number 1, you're asked which of the following four functions, so you have four functions here, are inverses of each other. And so you're told that two of them are inverses of each other. Okay, so if you look at f of x, so the way I would probably approach this would be this way. So if I look at f of x, which equals 3x minus 8, let's just go ahead and find its inverse and see if it's listed in this area. So remember the algebraic approach to finding the inverse? So we let f of x equal y, just like this, okay? And then we interchange the variables, so we get x equal 3y minus 8, right? And then we solve for y. And so I get add 8 to both sides, and so I get x plus 8 equal 3y. And then to get y by itself, I divide both sides by 3, okay? So what I found here was that this is the inverse of that. So that means that f inverse is going to equal x plus 8 divided by 3. That's what I found, okay? Now, let's see if this expression is listed anywhere here, and it is, right here. So right away, I found the inverse. All right, you may say, well, can we do it for this one? Sure you can. Let's see if these two are inverse of each other. But keep in mind that basically what you're doing is, remember in finding the inverse, or the inverse of a function, is that, see where f of x takes x, multiplies by 3, and then subtracts 8? The inverse does the opposite. So it adds 8, see right here, and then divides by 3. Okay? All right, so if you want to do this one, you would have, some of you probably would have gone to this first. Okay, so let's look at that. So let's look at this. So you would have said, okay, so I have g of x, which equals x minus 8 divided by 3, right? And so if I find the inverse of that one, I get y equals x minus 8 divided by 3. Then you interchange the variables, so I get x equal y minus 8 divided by 3, right? And then to solve for y, we're going to multiply both sides by 3, okay? So I get 3x equal, these 3's divide out, you get y minus 8. And then getting y by itself, you're going to add 8 to both sides. And so I get y equals 3x plus 8, okay? Now, this right here is the inverse of this. So that means that g inverse is this, 3x plus 8. All right, so if you did this one first, is the inverse of this anywhere in here? No. See, this is x divided by 3 plus 8, not this, right? Okay, so right away you know that the inverse of this is not listed anywhere. And then if you went here, let's say you started with this first. Okay, no big deal, you can do that first. All right, so let's say you did that first. So let's say you said h of x equal x plus 8 divided by 3. All right, so to find the inverse, we're going to do it algebraically. And so I get y equals x plus 8 divided by 3. Interchanging the variables, I get x equal y plus 8 divided by 3. Then remember, to get y by itself, the next step is to get y by itself. So to do that, you're going to multiply both sides by 3. All right, and so I get 3x equal, these 3's divide out, y plus 8, and then subtract 8 from both sides. I'm going to get y equals 3x minus 8, which is this one. See that? So those two are the inverses of each other. So what I found by doing this process, what I found is the inverse of this function. So what I found is that h inverse of x is 3x minus 8. That's what I found. All right. So right away you see that these two are the inverses of each other. And so if you went and even did this one, let's say you did this one. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. All right. So let's say you went and you want to find the inverse of k of x. All right. So here's k of x. All right. So to find the inverse, you're going to replace k of x with y. All right. Then you're going to interchange the coordinates. So x equals y divided by 3 plus 8. And then you're going to, remember, you got to get y by itself first. So what I would do is I would subtract 8 from both sides first, okay? Just like this. So I get x minus 8 equal y divided by 3. And then I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this. And then what I would do is, remember, you got to get y by itself. Right now you're dividing by 3. The opposite is multiplied by 3. But remember, you got to put that in parentheses because every term on this side has to be multiplied by 3. And so the 3's divide out, and you found the inverse. Okay, you found the inverse of this. And it kind of makes sense that the inverse of k of x, so k of x inverse, it kind of makes sense that k of x inverse is this. Okay, because look, this says that k of x takes x, divides by 3, and then adds 8. So the inverse will subtract 8 first, and then multiply by 3. Okay? All right, so anyway, so the answer to number 1 is f of x and h of x. Okay? So f of x and h of x. Okay, number 2, you want to find the inverse of this. So that's that approach here. So let's go ahead and do number 2 by using that algebraic approach. And so in number 2, we have this function. We have, so this is number 2. So you see right here, number 2. That's this right here. So we have g of x is equal to 2x minus 3. And you want to find the inverse. Now, by the way, this is easy enough to where you could think about it. You don't really have to show the work. Because you see what this says? This says that g of x takes x, multiplies it by 2, and then subtracts 3. So the inverse, listen to the words, the inverse will add, remember, it does the opposite. So the inverse will add 3 and then divide by 2. So you see anything in this little area that says that? So add 3 and divide by 2. All right, so you think this one's it, right? Let's see. So let's actually do the work. So we get y equals 2x minus 3. Interchange the coordinates. We get x equal 2y minus 3. And we got to solve for y. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So I get x plus 3 is equal to 2y. And then finally, we got to divide by 2. Okay? And so I get y equal x plus 3 divided by 2. And so that's the inverse of this. So g inverse of x is going to equal x plus 3 divided by 2. And that was the one we kind of said, right? Right here. So that's going to be B. All right, number 3. Okay, so here you're talking about words. Remember the words that we were talking about here? So this says that g of x takes x, multiplies it by 2, and subtracts 3, and the inverse will do the opposite, adds 3, and then divides by 2. Those are just words. So you're trying to come up with what, in words, what would the inverse do? All right, so the functions f of x and g of x are inverses, okay? So f of x involves the following operations. So remember, operations here was this: multiply by 2, subtract 3, all right? So this says that the operations are divide by 2 and then add 5. All right. So in your mind, you probably have something like this. All right. Think about this. In your mind, you're probably thinking, all right, well, this means this that f of x will take the x, will take x, divide by 2, and then add 5. And that's what this is saying. So this says this. Okay. So let's think about the inverse. So the inverse, remember, you always got to do the multiplication division last when finding the inverse. So the inverse will subtract 5 and then multiply by 2. All right, subtract 5 and then multiply by 2. So which one is that? That's this one, right? So that'll be A. Okay? So if you think about it, if we actually look at this, watch what happens. So let's see what it looks like. So we know that our function's this, right? So we have f of x equal x divided by 2 plus 5. So let's find the inverse and see what it actually looks like. We know in words this is it, but let's see what it is. So y equal x divided by 2 plus 5. Interchange the coordinates. So I get x equal y divided by 2 plus 5. And then, so I'm going to solve for y, so I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. So I get x minus 5 is equal to y divided by 2, right? Okay, and then you see the subtract 5 here. That's what this says. See, this says I subtract 5 first, which is what I'm doing. And then we'll multiply both sides by 2. You've got to put that in parentheses. So 2's divide out. So you get y equals 2 times x minus 5. And so the inverse, actually, which is g of x, they call it. So we're saying g of x. So g of x is going to equal 2 times x minus 5. Okay, so 2 times x minus 5. All right. Okay, now remember number 4. So remember when we graphed inverses, so here was a problem where this function, and so this function, this linear function, here's the graph, right? And then here's the inverse. And you know those are inverses because if you look at the line y equal x, they're symmetrical. These two lines are symmetrical about the line y equals x, which means this. Okay, so listen. And this was in our previous lesson dealing with this. If the point 42, see this is the point 42, right? So if the point 42, and I'm going to go ahead and use a pencil so I can erase. So if the point 42, hopefully you can see this, 42, okay? If the point 42 is on the graph of this function, and these two are inverses, then what point better be on that function, on its inverse? 2, 4, right? And look, 2, 4, right here. Okay, 2, 4. So what this is saying then is this, is that if the point 7, negative 2 is on the graph of f of x, then which of the following points will definitely be on the inverse? Well, remember, the inverse is going to be interchange. We went through this process. Remember, we interchanged the variables. Okay, so we're going to interchange the coordinates. So it'll be the point negative 2, 7. So negative 2, 7 is here. So it'll be C. Okay? All right, so that was the key to the worksheet on inverse functions, and that was part 1.